Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for a joint Tim and Steve video in this new set of, well, it's not that new on the channel, but it's the first time I'm seeing it. So
it's
for
newish.
me, it's new.
Still under construction. There's improvements to be made, so don't judge it too harshly.
Oh, it's very nice.
Oh,
I'm loving it. It's good. So yeah, this video, we just thought, well, there's been two pretty important GPU releases, not RTX 2060 12GB releases, but cards that maybe people would consider buying, at least some of them. And we thought, well, we've done the reviews and everything, but maybe give a bit of an update, talk about some of the hot topics that have come out since those GPU reviews have gone live, because there's been a few differing opinions, let's say, a few things come up that I think are worth talking about. And of course, we're talking about the RX 6500 XT and RTX 3050 reviews. Today's video is brought to you by Gigabyte and their range of laptops powered by NVIDIA RTX 30 series graphics. Whether you choose an Aorus laptop for high-end gaming or an Aero laptop for gaming and creating on the go, GeForce GPUs provide the performance you need. The Aero 15 line is a favourite of mine with its gorgeous 4K OLED display, but hardcore gamers will love the fast refresh rates on offer with Aorus laptops as well. Gigabyte's laptops come with GPUs from the RTX 3060 to the beastly RTX 3080 and are available in 15 and 17-inch sizes. Click the link in the description to learn more. Yeah, I think it's been pretty hard to do these reviews because you don't really know what the real pricing is going to be, and that kind of is a very important part of these reviews. But Definitely. Now, at least with the 6500 XT, we've got a bit better of an idea of how that's shaping up.
Yeah. Well, $200 MSRP, we knew that wasn't going to be a thing. We both thought $300 US would be a likely price that would be at for the foreseeable until the market changes in a significant way. And it looks like it's settling in around 260, probably 270. I think 270 is probably what you would call a typical price for it. So that's better than what we thought. Not much better, but it is better.
Yeah, and I think it's been good to see a couple of resupplies of cards at the MSRP if you just happen to go on the retailer and see it within that hour that they're available. But I don't think we're expecting those to last for very long going on past GPU launches, especially things like the RX 6600, where we saw that there were a few MSRP cards available at launch for a couple of days, and then over time it gets more expensive. But it does seem like $270 is where that card is sitting.
I think that's the settle-in price for now. Yeah.
So would you say that has changed anything about your review, or do you think it's a good price? Do you think people should buy it at $270? I mean, based on your review, I don't think you'd be saying that. But
no, not at $270. For reasons really that we outlined in the review, we'll probably get into in a moment. But yeah, $270, it's still, I mean, you can argue back and forth all day about the pricing and what you think these cards are worth, and ultimately that's for the viewer, the individual, to work out whether it's worth that to them. $200, I could sort of get on board. I guess the way we came at it, the angle we took was, okay, so you've got a finite amount of money, you've got a budget, what is the best we can do for you? What are your best options? And for $200, there's not much. Like, I think the RX 570s, what are they getting down to now? Would they be $220 for a 4GB model?
Yeah, I think the last time I did the pricing update, they were $240 used. So you're probably looking at a small price drop since then.
Yeah, I might get them for $220, $230, thereabouts. And really, I think it's probably not worth paying a premium for that part unless you need like hardware encoding.
Yeah.
And again, the PCI Express 3.0 angle is real. There are some serious issues there with the 6500 XT. So even there, like $200.
I think it's the maximum. It really feels like
is the maximum.
The MSRP. Because I mean, you know, this card, it's mostly designed to be used in laptop systems. Like that's the justification for many of the cutbacks to PCIe, to encoders and so on. And you'd expect for a desktop card, this would be usually the lowest tier card that AMD would offer, which historically has been between, say, $60 and $100 for the absolute cheapest, maybe $120 for some generations. So that's where this card should sit. So if you're thinking that, then $200 sort of seems like that's the most reasonable maximum, which is the MSRP. But certainly for $270, it's not a great buy. And I think that's reflected by the card being available for $270.
Yeah, because then you get into the region of, like, again, if you set some bizarre criteria where it has to be a brand new card because of whatever reasons, well then our argument would be, well, you just don't buy it.
Yeah, so you buy nothing. But you'd wait, or...
I suppose we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, $270, if that's your budget, on the used market at least, what are your options there? You can get a 4 gigabyte RX 580 for about $240. For just shy of $300, 5500 XT 4 gigabyte becomes an option, which is
1650 Supers as well in that price range.
Well, yeah, again, 1650 Super, about $300. It's $30 more, but again, you don't have the VRAM issues where if you're getting close to it or just on it, performance starts to tank. You get hardware encoding. You get the full PCIe bandwidth. So just an all-around better product, and it's more efficient. So it's more power efficient product. So really, you could argue that the 1650 Super is just an all-around better product. So it's probably worth paying $30 more for. And things like warranty and that can get a bit tricky, but
yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Like the 6500
you're getting
XT,
shafted either way.
Yeah, basically, and the 6500 XT probably doesn't have a lot of longevity in terms of usability for today's games and tomorrow's games at even 1080p, as you've talked about with its 4 gigabyte VRAM buffer. The fact that you slightly exceed it and it gets crippled because of the PCI bus.
There's a couple of funny things with this card because a lot of people keep referring to it as a $200 card, which is strange because it's been no different to all other releases where there were some MSRP stock, but let's be honest, it's not a $200 card. Most people, it's going to be around $270 US. And then the 4 gigabyte VRAM buffer keeps coming up as being a con, but it's kind of like, I don't like to think of this as a 4 gigabyte card because there are other 4 gigabyte cards that just work fine in a whole host of situations. Like, you could use Far Cry 6 at medium quality preset, which we tested. You could enable the HD texture pack. Now, I'm not saying necessarily want to do that. This is an example. But all other 4 gigabyte cards with the appropriate amount of PCI Express bandwidth work just fine, like 60 FPS, no dramas, whereas the 6500 XT tanks down to 10, 20 FPS.
Yep.
So it's like you can't really say, oh, it's a 4 gigabyte card. The 5500 XT is a 4 gigabyte card. Therefore, they'll have the same sort of VRAM limitations because that's not even the case. Like you should think of it as a 3 gigabyte card, for example, because it runs into those VRAM limitations much sooner than we've traditionally seen with a 4 gigabyte graphics card.
Yeah, so I think the general conclusion from seeing the real world pricing is that your review hasn't changed too much. Like the pricing is sort of settled a bit lower than what we thought, but
not much.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
And I think there's been some discussion lately about how do we do reviews when we don't know the real prices and things. But I think in this situation, what we've seen is that the general opinions haven't been affected too much by the real world pricing. Whereas for the 3050, we're kind of still in a position where, we're filming this today before the card actually.
Yes, this is the morning after actually. So I was up till 2 a.m. watching that review go out and make sure everything was fine. Got to bed, woke up this morning. Tim and I did our Patreon float plane live stream, and now we're doing this. So it's the morning after the reviews went out for us. So it's going on sale tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think it's important once the cards do go on sale that people don't make very quick judgments on the first wave of pricing, because even something like the 6500 XT went from a few cards available at MSRP, then it shot up well above $300 for a couple of days, and it took a little while to settle in on that $270 price. So with the 3050, I think there might be some discussion of, this looks like a really terrible product, because we've seen some early pricing of like $500, $600 or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a week or so for things to settle on that product.
It may settle as being a terrible product at the price that it settles to.
It might, but
we just don't know yet.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping that people don't just jump to conclusions about how bad it is in the first initial pricing wave thing and scalpers and all that. But it's pretty clear that it's a price tier different from the 6500 XT. Like, it's not going to be a $270 product. No. It's going to be $370 if we're lucky.
If it comes in at $370, and again, this comes back to what you're saying, do we have the price for reviews, which they can give us an MSRP, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. We can review the product, look at the performance, and we can tell you, we can give a few examples of where it may fall and what that would mean in terms of cost per frame. And ultimately, you guys have that data, so you can make those calculations and compare it to existing products. $370 looks like, that would be, I think, wishful thinking. I mean, ultimately, that's where it needs to be. It actually needs to be no more than $370 to make sense. Otherwise, you just get the RX 6600, which is continuing to come down in price. I think today we looked, it was $450 now.
$450, pretty good price.
So
yeah.
there's a card available brand new on Newegg. You can go buy it right now, $450. So if this thing is priced anywhere near that, you would just get the RX 6600. So yeah, that's sort of the pricing argument. This can't be over 370, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think as well though that the MSRP, it's an interesting discussion because we've got what here. Here is the good old
that's the 6500
XT. You know how we were just talking about this card being, at $200, it feels like the maximum that this card really should be sold for, and the MSRP feels kind of high. But if you got a 3050 for $250 at the MSRP, you'd say that's a great deal. Like that's a really good price for that product. And I think
in the current market.
In the current market. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting thing that we've seen from these products, that if the 3050 was cut down with some of the features like this card is, then $250 would feel like a bit of a stretch, like if it was a 4 gig card and all that. But the way that NVIDIA has made the product at their supposed MSRP is reasonable. But the issue then is that because it's reasonable, it's going to be inflated more. Yeah,
$250, you can argue that NVIDIA's taking more liberties with the MSRP. They're lying more, which may very well be the case. At the end of the day, we don't really care. Well, I mean, we care, but we don't care too much in the sense that whatever that sells for, whatever this sells for, we'll know, and we'll compare them then. So as I said, we've said this has to be 370 max for it to make sense and be really a go-to option. Otherwise, you'd get the RX 6600. But this makes sense at those. It really makes sense at 370 because there's no second-hand alternative that delivers the performance this delivers.
Yeah, and then it's new, so you get the benefit of that.
You get all the benefit, and there's no drawbacks to it. You know, it's got ×8 bandwidth, which is a little bit cut down, but it's got 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so it becomes somewhat of a relevant point. But there's no second-hand card you can buy that even comes close to rivaling this if this comes in at 370. Whereas this at 270, well, for example, this card here, you can get for about, well, this is an 8 gigabyte version, but if this was the 4 gigabyte version, which I haven't got, it's somewhere over there, but this is about 240.
Yeah.
So you save a bit of money on this card, has hardware encoding, has listing. It's arguably a better product. And then for roughly the same price as this on the used market, 5500 XT 4 gigabyte or 1650 Super. There are alternative options that have been around now, so why bring out a heavily gimped product? And then for this to be justifiable at $270, you would need at least, well, really you'd need ×16 bandwidth with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Yeah. So it'd need to have ×16 bandwidth. It would need to have hardware encoding. And the hardware encoding thing's maybe an interesting point to explore as well, because I'm surprised by how many people underestimate the importance of that feature or don't quite understand. I think it's, I'm not a streamer, therefore I don't need it. So that's an interesting thing. But I think hardware encoding is a really important feature. And then some modern decoding stuff like AV1 decoding and features like that. But I think if it had 4 gigabytes of VRAM, as I said in my review, I can handle that. They're not doing it to make this unappealing to miners. They're not doing you any favors with the 4 gigabytes of VRAM. It just happens that memory is expensive and they've decided to cut the cost there and go with half as much. So whatever. But a nice byproduct is that it's not effective for mining. So I can get on board with that angle. But it needs ×16 bandwidth. If it had the ×16 bandwidth and I think hardware encoding at $270, you could be like, it's not great.
Yeah, you could overlook the 4 gig, you could overlook the 2 display outputs.
But you're like, in PCI Express 3.0 system, it would be rivaling a GTX 1650 Super. But it'd be brand new, warranty and all that. And I think then I could be like, you know what, it's not great value, but given the current market, not too many shortcomings of this product, I could recommend it for $270 for a budget build. But as it stands, way too many shortcomings, and there are just better second-hand alternatives.
To cut back, NVIDIA decided not to cut back too much on that product, and that's
just make it more expensive.
I think that's made the difference in those reviews.
So I think that's everything on pricing, really. There's not too much more to say. We just have to wait and see where this slots in now. As it stands, this is too expensive at $270. Really needs to be $200 before you can sort of start to justify it, and even then it's a bit. And I guess another angle to consider with this card, which there hasn't been too many people with positive things to say about it or pushing it. Really, there's almost none. But the ones that are, I think they could be shooting themselves in the foot because, the internet doesn't forget. And I really think this card is going, if you think it's bad now, just wait till we get 2 years down the track and you're turning down the latest and greatest AAA titles at 1080p to the absolute lowest possible quality settings, and this is getting nowhere near 60 FPS. I think paying $270 US for a card that can't play modern games in 2 years' time at 60 FPS, 1080p low is just... And I think that will be... I'm quite confident that's going to be the reality for this product. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball. But I think that's going to... well, we do have a... but I think that's going to happen. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's interesting contrasting this to when the 580 came out and the 480 before it, when it had the 4 and 8 gig models. Because back when, let's say the RX 480 came out with the 8 gig model, it was, between $200 and $300. I think it was $240.
$240, I think, and then...
for the 8 gig card.
Yep.
And that card came out, and the consoles at the time, the PS4, the Xbox One, had 8 gigabytes of memory. So you could be pretty sure that that aspect of the card isn't going to be crippled in the lifespan of that card. Because you buy it, 2015 consoles, those consoles are still very popular. Game developers aren't going to go ham on going above 8 gigabyte for quite a number of years. And it's shown that 8 gigabytes was perfectly fine for that generation. But for this product...
Or 4 gigabytes, you're saying, was fine for that generation?
8 gigabytes.
Oh, okay.
Well, 8 gigabytes gave it a lot of longevity. It was perfectly fine for many years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Whereas this card coming out with 4 gig, it's not only half the VRAM of the last generation of consoles, it's now a quarter of the VRAM of today's consoles. So as developers are deciding to significantly increase the graphics quality of their games, they're going to be adding a lot more VRAM. So I think your point about this being not a very capable card for tomorrow's games is going to come very quickly as those developers are going away from 8 gig and moving more into the 16 gig era.
Well, I mean, we were at the tail end of 4 gigabyte over a year ago. Like, it was really at the point where it's like, oh, these 4 gigabyte cards are really struggling even with medium quality settings. And texture quality is a big deal for how the game looks. And again, you can argue, oh, this is an esports card. It's for, Dota 2 and Counter-Strike and all those sorts of games. Like, yeah, okay, maybe.
That's what APUs are for.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can buy really cheap graphics cards to do that as well, so that argument sort of falls on its face there.
But something like a GTX 1060 6 gigabyte, that's sort of a very popular card that lots of people have, which I think is going to become sort of the minimum spec for developers. They'll say, well, the 1060 is still very popular. It's got 6 gig of VRAM. That's sort of the minimum level that we can create like a low settings for. Whereas 4 gigabyte cards are below even that.
But again, what I'm saying is I don't even like to view this as a 4 gigabyte card. Because if this was a 4 gigabyte RX 580, driver support withstanding, if we get 2 years down the track, I suspect this will play 1080p low in your latest and greatest titles at an acceptable level, like 60 FPS. And I think if this is just churning out 60 FPS under those conditions, this is going to be down like 30. It's going to be terrible. So I don't like to even think of this as a 4 gigabyte card because, it is technically a 4 gigabyte card, but you can overrun the VRAM buffer a little bit on these other products. We've seen it in the benchmark results. Like, we've shown it, others have shown it. There's so many great examples, like Doom Eternal, for example. Using medium quality texture pool in Doom Eternal absolutely cripples this card, whereas this thing plays just fine. You're getting, I think it was 100 FPS on this, and I can't even remember what it was, but you can check my review. The Doom Eternal results are not pretty, and that's Doom apparently won't let you exceed the VRAM buffer. So in the settings there, you've got to fit within it, and it still was so bad. So I don't even really like to think of it as a 4 gigabyte card.
So the next thing that's happened sort of a little bit since these reviews have come out, we've had a chance to look at everyone's content on this, has been, there's been a couple of review outlets of reviewers that have made the point that the 6500 XT is actually a good product because it's the cheapest available card. Whereas I think you have a little bit of a different opinion on that argument, and that just because it's available and cheap doesn't mean that it's good and worth buying.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not even that hard to refute that point, is it? It's like, it's not a good product, and just because it's the only... Look, if there was no secondhand market, and if this is all you have access to, there's nothing else, this is it, and you're absolutely desperate for a graphics card, that doesn't make this a good product. It just makes it the product, right?
Yeah, there's no competition, you've got no choice.
So you still don't say nice things about it. It's not amazing. It's not good. It's just, wow, this is a really bad situation. You're in a tough spot. This is your way out if you want to take it. Otherwise, continue to hold out or go find something else to do with your time other than PC gaming. maybe I can't believe I'm saying this, maybe even console gaming. But yeah, that doesn't make it a good product. It doesn't. I mean, I don't really know what more I need to say on that.
Yeah, I think there's always that argument of, there's no bad products, there's only bad prices, which Gamers Next has recently made a video comprehensively illustrating why that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely applies to this. Like if the 3050, like the 3050 is a good, like from a hardware perspective, it's good. It's got enough VRAM. It doesn't have PCIe limitations. It's got encoding.
Solid product.
It's a good product. And yeah, maybe it's overpriced or whatever, but it's a competently designed good product. Whereas the 6500 XT is a bad product for many of the reasons we've talked about and don't want to keep rehashing all over again. But I think the thing with just saying that it's available and that you can buy it and that's the reason why it's good is that, and you brought this up, I think, on Twitter, was that you don't need a review to tell you that a card is available and at a price that's the cheapest price. Like, there's no point even watching a review if that's going to be the conclusion, because you're not really analyzing the product. If you're going to look at this product and say, it's got all these flaws and problems, but then you're saying, but we're just going to set all of that aside, we're just going to ignore everything we've just talked about, the performance, whatever, everything, but actually you should just buy this because it's available, then you could have just said that at the start of the review. Like, you could have just said, hey, this is the 6500 XT, this card's available and it's the cheapest card, so there it is, there you go.
It goes that saying, right?
Yeah.
As a reviewer, I just feel like that's not doing your job. Like, at least for me, the idea of our review is we're doing all the work for you. We're getting this product, we're comparing it to all relevant products and maybe some that aren't relevant, but just as a reference point, we're testing it in all, ways that we think you would use it, a wide range of games. We did preset scaling with this to show you where it kind of works and where it doesn't work. Basically give you the full picture, right? Top down, full picture. You watched our video, you really hopefully come away knowing everything you need to know about this product. And then ultimately it's up to you. Is it worth it? We can give our opinions on what we think about it, but you have all the benchmark data there. You've got cost per frame stuff. You can adjust pricing for your region and redo the math there. So we're doing all that research for you. Like, how does this compare to secondhand options?
Yep.
Don't just ignore that because for some reason you have to buy new. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But at least open your viewers' eyes to all the possible options. And then they can go, look, the used market in my region, my country sucks, or, for whatever reason, I can't, this is it. So, do I want to spend $270 on a card that's heavily compromised, or do I not? And that's up to the viewer to decide. But to say that it's a great product because it's the product is just a bit baffling to me.
Yeah, and it's kind of an excuse in some ways. Like, you don't want to have a situation where companies feel they can get away with creating extremely garbage, crappy products just because they're the only competitor in that market. That creates monopolistic situations, which are bad. You want competition, but also you want just consumers not to be rolled on products. And by sort of saying this card is good because it's available means that for a future generation, the only criteria that the manufacturer needs to meet is that it's available and at a low price, which I think is not accurate. Like, it needs to actually be good.
And can XFX, and I don't mean to throw XFX under the bus, they've already been associated enough with poor coverage, but can A brand make the cheapest 6500 XT card by making a VRM that thermal throttles?
Yeah.
And they make the card even worse. What if they make it 2 lanes?
Yep.
Just to save money, and they make
one display output.
Yeah, they make the cheapest 6500 XT, and therefore you should buy that because now it is the cheapest graphics card, the cheapest new graphics card you can get. I mean, there's endless examples. Like, we did a lot of in-depth coverage on Z590 motherboards. We're continuing that with Z690 now, but Z590, we came across an ASRock motherboard that couldn't run the K-SKU CPUs stock. It was throttling stock CPUs, and apparently it was a Z series motherboard, and we know what that means. They're designed for overclocking. But it was the cheapest. Yep. It was the cheapest Z590 motherboard you could get. So therefore, was it the best value board? Was it the best entry level? Was it the best affordable board? No, it was terrible. It was absolute garbage, and you shouldn't have bought it.
Yeah, another example would be something like the GT 1030 DDR4 version.
Yeah.
Where there was some deceptive, misleading marketing on
bit.
that front as
Just
well.
a little bit.
But also, that's a card where, like you were saying, they took a product which wasn't great, they made it worse
Somehow.
and it was also then the cheapest available product at the time, and it still wasn't worth buying for a number of reasons. But I just think you don't want to give manufacturers that out. You don't want to give them that. You can do this. You can make a DDR4 version of this card or whatever, and just because it's the cheapest, it's the best. That creates poor GPU market conditions.
That's a good example. That was really predatory what they did there. Like, apart from the fact that it was anti-consumer, disgusting, you name it, they're taking advantage of what I sort of consider to be the more vulnerable market segment. The people who haven't got much money, the people that are trying to enjoy gaming or make the most of their free time, and they in that instance that was why that was disgusting. But it's the same with this. Like, if you really are, if you've got really an old card like a 750 Ti or something, and you've been desperate to upgrade, this isn't a small amount of money. Like $270 for this. Again, if that is the situation, you need something desperately. RX 570,
Xbox Series S.
I mean, you're not looking after your viewer by saying this is the cheapest new card, therefore it's good. It's like, that's really bad advice.
Yeah.
And it's not taking so many things into consideration. But again, if that's your opinion, it's kind of fine, but I would have, at the very least, liked you to have explored all avenues. I'd like you to show the strengths and the weaknesses of the product, not just sort of mention them, brush them off, and move on with the review. Actually show the problems with the product, what it can and can't do, and then what some of the viable alternatives may be if you want to go down that path.
Yeah.
But not just sales pitch this like in a way that AMD would do, and that's the review. So that's really all my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one thing that we were discussing just between us as all these reviews were coming out is the angle of when AMD launched this card, did they end up hurting their brand? Because the reviews were so negative, among the most negative GPU reviews I can remember seeing for some time. Even the GT 1030 DDR4, like not as many people covered that product and all that.
It wasn't a product release.
It was a widespread product release that got extremely negative coverage. Has that hurt, maybe not the AMD brand as a whole, but the Radeon brand?
So what you're asking is this AMD's Intel 11900K moment?
Yes.
So for those of you not up to speed, Intel quickly rushed out an 11th gen series before Alder Lake. And while some of the series was reasonable, parts like the 1100K were just disgustingly bad. And it was met with heavy criticism for pretty much everybody, tech reviewers, enthusiasts, everybody. And it seems to have slowed sales of Alder Lake, which is a much better product.
It's created problems like the 11900K being a really hot, power-hungry part, rolling over to 12th gen, where there are some products where that's the case, but a lot of their lineup is actually reasonable on that front.
And when there's only two competitors, the 11900K was essentially a Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9 advertisement.
Yep.
That's essentially what it was. It was a big review cycle showing how much better Ryzen CPUs were. And it really hurt Intel's brand, which was one of the stronger brands in the tech space. And they've taken a big hit, and it's certainly slowed momentum for them. So Radeon, which isn't in the position Intel was in, and certainly couldn't handle any hits to the brand, the reputation, the mindshare was already very weak. Yeah, I feel like this product has done a lot more damage for the Radeon brand and AMD as a company than good.
Yeah, I think when it comes to all these brand perception things, our general audience of people, pretty smart audience, watch reviews, they're interested in getting all the data. For those people, it's not going to impact things like the 6700 XT and 6900 XT that much, because if you do the research, you figure out those products are reasonable. But there's issues for sort of your casual buyer that goes in, I want to upgrade my PC. Maybe they've got an OEM system, they want to chuck in a new GPU. They're like, what's available? And they might have heard, hang on, didn't I hear that there was that AMD product that was really bad recently? What was that? I can't quite remember the model name.
Radeon GPU is crap.
So people were saying that AMD card was bad, so I'm just going to get an NVIDIA card. And that's maybe similar to the Intel situation. Oh, weren't people saying that Intel product was bad? I'll just get the competitor. So it doesn't matter whether it's only this card that's bad. It's the issues of those people, the more casual observers of the market, sort of listening and hearing things, which is why companies like NVIDIA have for so long wanted to be in the leadership position with the fastest GPU. No matter how expensive it was or power hungry, they've always wanted to say, we have the fastest GPU. And for many generations, I think that's significantly helped their brand because you hear, oh, NVIDIA, they're the fastest brand.
Brand perception.
So therefore, all the products are faster, which obviously isn't true in a lot of situations, but it's that brand perception. And I think launching cards like this do a great disservice to their brand. They've built it up with these products that have been competitive. The 6900 XT is very, very competitive with at the top end in terms of performance. They've had 6600 XT, 6700 XT are good products, and then they've gone and released this, and they've just generated all this backlash for them that is going to hurt that market.
Yeah, well, why do you think NVIDIA didn't want to officially release the RTX 3080 12GB?
Yeah, for a similar sort of...
They don't want to damage the GeForce RTX brand. And that would have... they'd be reeling from what happened with the 3070 Ti and the 3080 Ti. They don't want to keep having these review cycles where they just get smashed by the majority of tech media. And, you get players like Linus who they get millions of views, and that's a lot of people they're influencing. Like, it's becoming more and more of a mainstream thing.
Yeah.
And they want to avoid that. So that's why we had that mess with the 3080 12GB, which is essentially a cash grab. And that's what's happened with this.
Yeah, it puts them in a hard position because obviously you don't want to just, in an ideal market, you don't just abandon $200 GPU buyers. You produce a card that $200 GPU buyers want to buy. So they are kind of stuck in this position where maybe this was the only product they could offer in that market at the time. They couldn't cut down the Navi 23 die enough to get it to a position where it could be usable. So they're stuck with Navi 24. But it kind of feels like maybe they shouldn't have released this product, or at the very least,
gone with your original intention for it.
Gone with the original intention, released as a $100 card, or wait until the market conditions allow that product to sit at a more reasonable price. So people aren't sitting here saying, wow, this is a $270 product. Maybe if they could sit and say it's $150, the perception would have been a lot more different. Like if you could buy RX 6600s in abundance at the MSRP, then I think a lot of that heat would be off a product like this because that card would be taking all those mainstream sales. So I do feel like, maybe this product is going to set them back, and maybe it was a bit of a misstep and a backwards step for a lot of the goodwill that they've brought up over the years for offering value products.
I think there's no doubt that that's the case. And sort of another interesting angle to explore is this a cash grab, or is it actually the best thing they could do at this point in time? Hard to say. I think it's a pretty good margin product for them, despite claims and estimations and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really care to argue that point. For me, it's irrelevant. Like I don't care if they're only just making money on this or if it is a cash grab or whatever. It is what it is. For me, when I review it, none of that really weighs into it. It's like, okay, so what does this product do for you?
Yeah.
That's all I care about. What does this do for the viewers? What are the alternatives? Does it actually move us forward in any way, or is it a bit of a setback? And again, as we've talked about at length in this video, you've already been able to buy this performance or better for that amount of money or slightly less without all of the drawbacks. So this is fundamentally a worse product than what we already had from 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So as you're saying, like it would be best not to release it if that's the case.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously some product management considerations here where this card, the GPU, as we've talked about, almost certainly was destined for laptops where the cutbacks and things don't matter too much. Like they're mitigated by other aspects of the laptop design. But I think if you were designing a desktop card, like you were going back, you're looking at the GPU die itself, you were thinking, okay, where can I cut back on things? You very much wouldn't have cut down to, say, PCIe x4. Like that's a...
Considering there's not a single motherboard that has a x4 primary PCIe slot.
It wouldn't have cut, like adding that feature in would have maybe added a small amount of GPU die size, would have slightly increased the price of the die, which is obviously a component of the card, it's not the entire cost of the card. So maybe it would have cost them $205 to add PCIe x4. That's probably a gross exaggeration of how much it would cost. But let's say, things just like adding encoding the PCIe up to x16 probably wouldn't have cost them all that much to add. So, I mean, from that sense, I find it hard to say that was the best that they could have done in that price point. maybe the VRAM consideration.
I
and
mean,
stuff,
well, they're already heavily constrained on 7 nanometer.
Yep.
So making this a 7 nanometer product was never going to make sense. Had to be a 6 nanometer product, and this is all they had ready, as what I imagine the situation was.
Probably,
This was being prepared for something else, and like, oh, hang on a minute, we can make much more money selling this on it. That has to be it, right?
Has to be it, yeah.
But whatever the case, it doesn't matter whether we're wrong or right about that. For me, again, that is irrelevant. I haven't put too much time or thought into it. Haven't done the required research. For me, the point is, like, what does this do for the viewer, the consumer? Who's buying it? How does it move the needle forward? And it really doesn't.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a new graphics card.
Yeah, and I think a really key point to make as well is if we look at the 3050, that's a GA106 product, for example, but NVIDIA has room to create a lower tier card than the 3050. Like the 3050 isn't the bottom of what they can offer. They have a GA107 die that they use for laptops, and the current configuration as the 3050 Ti has a very similar core configuration to the 3050, and then they offer the laptop 3050, which is like a cut down GA107, and that doesn't have the limitations that this product has. GA107, I'm not sure on the PCIe lanes, I believe it's not ×4, but it certainly has got encoding functionality as one key feature addition, and probably, other features as well, like additional display outputs and stuff. So if NVIDIA was releasing a lower tier card to compete with this, I think they would end up with a better product. And I think that sort of also negates the whole this is the best they could do angle for things. NVIDIA's designed this lower tier die, GA107, which I feel is a more suited product to a low-end desktop card than what Navi 24 has ended up being. Of course, NVIDIA still has to release I don't know, what would it be, an RTX 3040 or something if they go down that line, which I don't imagine they will. But if they decided to, I think they would end up with a better product and would cause lots of problems for the 6500 XT.
Yep. Yeah, I think with the 6500 XT, the review really said it all. We've emphasized or clarified a lot of points with it. I think really now there's not much more to say. It's just to wait and see how this card progresses over the next few years.
Yeah, and if NVIDIA wants to be really aggressive with those 3050s and really capture a lot of the mainstream market, then hitting around that $350, $370 price in the real world is, again, going to cause a lot of problems in the mainstream. And
can't see it happening, but if it does, it would actually be great, as bizarre as that is.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, as I said, I think that's probably going to cover it for this recap of the 6500 XT. And yeah, there's not too much to say about the RTX 3050. Again, the review just went up mere hours ago, and they won't be available. Well, they'll probably be coming available by the time you watch this video. They probably will become available that day, because that'll be tomorrow, all over the place. Schedules. And yeah, as Tim was saying, give the pricing a bit of a chance to settle in, but we're not expecting any miracles on that one. But there'll be a GPU update next month.
Yeah, we'll look into scalper pricing as usual, and I think we'll also go into and have a look at, cards on Newegg are starting to become a bit more available. Like we talked about the 6600 for $450 US new on Newegg. So we'll explore that a little bit, see where pricing has settled next month. But yeah, it really feels like there's been so much to talk about this product and almost nothing to talk about the 3050, because it's kind of just like a mess. Or they released it, it was fine.
Yeah, we had to film this video now because Tim and I are catching up. Tim doesn't live locally to me, so it's kind of a day trip for Tim or I to catch up. And we'd planned it for the Patreon float plane live stream stuff, plus the monthly Q&As, which will be coming up over the next few days after this video. So timing wasn't ideal, but again, to really probably do this justice, you'd have to wait a couple of weeks anyway, at least a week to pricing to settle in and see what availability is like.
I think if the 3050 comes in at a really good price, like it settles at a nice level, then it might justify coming back, talking again about maybe beating our expectations there, sort of a review update, because we did expect the pricing to be much closer to $500, but we'll see. We'll evaluate that.
You'd think it can't be now, but anyway. So that's going to do it.
Yep.
So thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel directly and get access to some cool stuff, we have Floatplane, Patreon, Discord, Q&As, behind-the-scenes content.
Live streams.
I think that's everything, isn't it?
Pretty much it all.
So yeah, Tim and I get together like this at least once a month and live stream for the Floatplane and Patreon members and talk about any topics that have been going on during the month, any dramas, anything. We just talk about it, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, check that out if you're interested, but if not, perfectly fine. And And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.